You're listening to the Jefferson Exchange. Thanks for joining us. The JX starts today with the debrief, where JPR reporters discuss the stories they've been covering this week, including why marijuana growers in Humboldt County are hurting, where Grants Pass is setting up new homeless campsites, and why there's a shortage of prosecutors in Shasta County. I'm Maria Carter, JPR's news director.
I'm Jane Vaughn, housing, homelessness, and education reporter.
I'm Roman Battaglia, politics, environment, and energy reporter.
And I'm Justin Higginbottom, public health and safety reporter.
And Justin, you had a feature this week on the situation in Humboldt County for legal cannabis growers. How are those farmers doing there?
Yeah, not too well. So many are struggling to survive right now, let alone make a profit that they could in the past. And that's really because the price of legal wholesale marijuana has just dropped so significantly in the last few years. At least part of the reason we've seen that drop is an increase in supply with especially larger farms that can operate more efficiently. They have these economies of scale. But that leaves smaller farms kind of struggling to make ends meet. And then there's also the cost side. So the legal cannabis market is regulated pretty heavily, even more than some other, agricultural products. You have to track the product and then follow all these environmental rules. And in Humboldt, what really got many farmers worried recently was also this local tax that the county passed in 2016.
And you've covered this local tax. Tell us what's being taxed and how is it affecting farmers?
So this is Measure S. It was passed by voters back in 2016, like I mentioned, and it charges farmers per acre of land that they're cultivating on. The revenue goes to county services, including cleaning up abandoned grow sites in the county, which has been a problem, more so like on the illegal grow sites, but still this revenue was supposed to go to help that. And back in 2016, when it passed, it seemed like a pretty good idea to a lot of residents in Humboldt. The legal cannabis industry was making a lot of money. The price for cannabis was higher. And it was thought by many that those businesses could absorb this cost. But like I mentioned, the market has changed a lot, and that tax has become much more burdensome as the market for cannabis has changed. The counties suspended or reduced the tax for a lot of years, including this year. But a lot of farmers still owe, money for this tax, in some cases tens of thousands of dollars. And as of last month, at least, there were hundreds of farmers in Humboldt that still owed this tax. So the counties, they've pushed back the deadline for collecting this tax again and again, but recently they decided on a hard deadline for farmers to pay. And if they don't pay, then these farmers could risk losing their license.
So where does Humboldt County's cannabis industry really go from here?
It's kind of up in the air right now. So it's important to note, like I'm sure many people realize, that this county, especially southern Humboldt, has a long tradition of growing cannabis, way before legalization, of course. And the economy really relies on it. So businesses rely on those workers and their money to spend their money locally in southern Humboldt especially. And since the downturn, there's kind of been this knock-on effect at the county level where Humboldt's latest budget has a $10 million deficit. And according to the county, that's in part because of less sales tax revenue as the cannabis industry retracts and there's less workers there to spend money. It looks like the era of sort of easy high prices for cannabis is over. I don't think that's coming back. At least experts say that. I spoke to an economist at UC Davis who studies the cannabis industry, and he says the drop in prices is what they've been expecting, and he says it will probably drop more, kind of even moving to closer to the price of illegal cannabis, which is cheaper right now. And that's because cannabis is, now that, since legalization, it's now starting to look just like any other commodity, like wheat or corn. It'll be farmed efficiently like other agricultural products, and the price will just continue to drop. An important point, though, that this economist made is that those regulations and like the local tax that I mentioned, those barriers to entry is actually what is keeping the price from dropping even further. So without those barriers, then the supply would grow even more and the price would continue to drop.
So is there any hope for farmers in Humboldt County?
There is, luckily. So this economist says that the marijuana market is still kind of in its infant stages, if you think about the legal market, that is, and it'll probably mature in a way where consumers will stop shopping for weed by only THC amount. So what you have now is a lot of cannabis users. They go to dispensaries and they're just buying the strongest weed for the lowest price. But if you look at other products, sort of similar products like alcohol, that isn't really how it works. You don't usually, unless you're in college maybe, you don't go to a wine store and just look for the strongest wine that's at the lowest price point. You look for quality and you're willing to pay a bit more for that quality. Luckily, Humboldt County grows some of the best quality cannabis in the world. It's literally known around the world, like California weed. It's a marketing strategy. And smaller farmers should be able to charge more for that quality. Here's the economist I spoke to, Robin Goldstein.
In the same way that Napa Valley is able to produce and export wine at higher price points than your average wine, California cannabis can be sold at a premium. Just by saying it's from California, it represents to consumers, I think, not only all over the country, but in the future all over the world. This is great weed.
So I spoke with a small farmer in Humboldt, the owner of Whitehorn Valley Farm, and he's sort of betting on this too, the market maturing in this way. His cannabis is organic, it's grown outdoors, it's on a family homestead where his children live, and he's noticed a shift in the market where this high-quality cannabis is being valued more. The question is whether this shift in the market, where consumers are more willing to pay higher prices for higher quality, will happen soon enough, because as this farmer brought up, these businesses in Humboldt, if they go under, it's not given that they'll be replaced. So because it takes a lot of effort to get around these environmental regulations to grow in the region, if someone loses their license, it's not like that license can just be turned back on. And in the story, he mentions that if hundreds of farmers in southern Humboldt lose their license, that could be like a permanent extinction event. That's the phrase he used, because it's not a given that businesses will replace those farmers that go under.
Wow. Well, Jane, you wrote a story this week about new homeless campsites in Grants Pass. First, why is the city creating more homeless campsites there?
Basically because they were ordered to do so by a court. And so a little bit of background, the city is in the middle of a lawsuit claiming that its treatment of homeless people violates state law. And so a judge recently placed the city under a court order, which says that the city can't enforce its public camping laws until it fulfills two conditions. One of those conditions is that the city has to increase its capacity of designated homeless campsites back to what it was before the city closed a campsite in January. So the judge estimated that capacity was 150 tents. And so now the city has two homeless campsites, but they need to increase the capacity of their campsites so they can get the court order lifted and then be able to enforce their public camping laws again. The other condition the city has to meet under that court order is that they have to make sure that all of these campsites provide accessible routes and services for people with disabilities. So they have to do those two things, and then hopefully the court order can be lifted and the case can move forward.
Well, where will these new campsites be?
They're going to be right next to the old ones. They currently have one campsite. They're all downtown Grants Pass. One is right by City Hall on 6th Street. One's on 7th Street, right by the police station. And then on Wednesday at a city council meeting, they picked these two new locations. And so basically now all four of the city's homeless campsites are going to be right downtown within the span of 2 blocks. And so the two new ones are both parking lots. They're both adjacent to the current site on 6th Street. They're both parking lots. One of them is currently being used for City Hall employee parking. And then one of them, they're calling it the on-track parking lot because it's used by the Addiction Treatment Center on track. And so the City Hall employee parking lot is going to become a homeless resting site on April 23rd. The city is going to rent some parking spaces at a nearby church for City Hall employees to try to alleviate some of the impact that not having this parking lot will have. And then the on-track site might take a little bit longer to actually open up, up because On Track is relocating and the city still has to basically give them time to move out and give them access to the building. So they're planning to create these 2 new homeless campsites on these 2 parking lots that will include restrooms and trash services and fencing and some various services that the city pays for. And then they say that once the new resting sites are up and running, the city's legal counsel will then ask the court to lift that court order.
So, what are residents in Grants Pass saying?
It's been really a mixed response. Some neighbors by the sites nearby are really concerned about drug use and crime and safety. Some people say, you're picking the best spots that you can. They've considered a lot of different sites. The police chief had actually recommended that all 4 of these sites not be so close together. He was concerned about behavioral issues and crime. And, if one person has a problem with another person and they're all in a 2-block radius, there could be some problems. Some people, like there's a counselor, Indra Nicholas, who wanted to spread the city campsites out throughout the different wards in the city so they're not all concentrated downtown. On the other hand, there are some people like Counselor Rob Pell who figured, well, we're already negatively impacting this neighborhood with these campsites. Might as well just put them all here and confine the impact to this one spot. Some people would have preferred certain sites over another. The city council considered a lot of different potential sites, but no one really seems to be happy with this. No one really wants these in their backyard. The councilors claim it'll be a temporary solution, and really people are just kind of sick and tired of this situation on all sides, really. Grants Pass also only recently got out from under another court order, which lasted for 4 years. And that was part of a different lawsuit over Grants Pass's treatment of homeless people, which the city won. The U.S. Supreme Court decided it in the city's favor. But now they have this new lawsuit and a new court order, so they're trying to deal with that.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Roman, you published a story just this morning about a shortage of lawyers at the district attorney's office in Shasta County. Why bring us this story right now?
Yeah, originally I decided to do this because there was this public safety meeting at the Shasta County Board of Supervisors where all the different public safety departments presented about the challenges their departments are facing, and the district attorney's office and the public defender's office also talked about shortages of attorneys being a real struggle to hire staff and stuff. So I kind of wanted to dive deeper into that and talk to a lot of different people to kind of get to the bottom of like what's actually causing this and, why is this an issue and how are things going to be solved.
Well, break it down for us. Why does nobody want to be a prosecutor in Shasta County?
Yeah, I think like the first issue is that the workload is really high. Shasta County files a lot of cases is what I found, a lot per attorney in the office. I basically compared the amount of cases, of felony cases that Shasta County files compared to every other county in the state. And this is just comparing that per the amount of staff in the office every year at a certain date. Not every attorney deals with felony cases, but we wanted to look at it overall and kind of compare things. And Shasta County filed a lot more than the statewide average, and so that means that attorneys, they're overworked. They're working 12-hour days, longer on trial days, and that leads to burnout. More attorneys leave, which means more workload for everyone else. The other issue is that Shasta County is in a rural area. The DA also said that less people are going into prosecution nowadays because of societal trends. And then there's also changes in the state law that means more work for prosecutors. They have to relitigate cases that happened a long time ago because changes in the state law might mean that someone might not have been sentenced to a crime or something in the past. And so the DA has to relitigate that case to ensure that that person remains in prison or gets released.
Sure. Well, from your story, it sounds like the solution is not as simple as just paying more. Why is that?
Yeah, there's really a debate on what the right solution to this problem is. The DA and the prosecutors want to see their pay increased. We've been seeing prosecutors at public meetings in Shasta County talking about wanting an increase in pay. The minimum pay for a prosecutor in Shasta County is around $80,000, which might be a lot for someone like me, but for a lawyer, that's not a lot of money because it's very easy to find somewhere with a starting pay in the 6 figures. But other people in the county think that the pay isn't the only solution. I talked to Matt Plummer, who's one of the county supervisors, and he says, the county has to be careful about spending money, especially right now.
We don't have sufficient funding to cover all the public safety expenses that we would like to be able to cover. And so I think that requires us to be more strategic, more focused, and prioritize across the whole sea of options we have. and design a system that would focus on achieving something very tangible and concrete.
Yeah, so they have to worry about the whole county budget. I also talked to some other DAs for the story, like the director of the California District Attorneys Association. Vacancy rates are higher in rural areas, and less people are going to law school in general because of tuition. So, we'll kind of see where this goes with Shasta County and what's actually going to be the solution to this issue.
And just quickly, are we seeing this in the rest of the state?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, pay is lower in Northern California counties. I have a whole map where you can see, the minimum pay for prosecutors there.
And that's on ijpr.org?
That's correct.
Okay, well, that's it for the debrief this week. Thank you for listening. You can reach the newsroom with comments on our coverage and suggestions for things we should cover in the future through our news tip line. That's on our website at ijpr.org. And you can find this program and more at jeffexchange.org or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.